My name is Detective John Kowalski. I'm 61 years old, and for the past 3 years, I've been living like a ghost on Chicago's South Side. 28 years with the Chicago Police Department taught me that life can change in a heartbeat. I learned that the hard way when a domestic violence call went sideways and left me with PTSD that destroyed my marriage and everything I thought I knew about myself. It was a gray Thursday in November. One of those days when the Lake Michigan wind cuts right through you and the Chicago sky looks like dirty concrete. I was walking back from the Jewel Osco on 95th Street, where I buy my bread and milk every day at 5 p.m., the only activity that forces me out of my apartment. I was trudging down Ashland Avenue, avoiding eye contact with neighbors like I always do. 3 years living in Bronzeville, and I'm still that weird ex-cop who doesn't talk to anyone. I prefer it that way. Conversations lead to questions, and I don't have the energy to pretend everything's okay. If you're enjoying this true and moving story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any emotional stories like this one. I had just turned onto 89th Street when I saw them. 5 little bundles of tan and black fur digging through a torn garbage bag behind a row of brownstones. They were German Shepherd mix puppies, couldn't have been more than 2 months old. They were soaked from the morning sleet, shivering in the bitter wind, and way too skinny for their age. One of them, the smallest, had a white patch on his chest that looked like a broken star. I stopped instinctively. 28 years on the force teaches you to recognize desperation when you see it, and these 5 were desperate. The biggest of the group looked me straight in the eye with a look I knew too well from my own reflection these past years. It was the look of someone the world had given up on. "Poor little guys," I muttered, adjusting my grocery bag under my arm. "World's been cruel to you too, huh?" I kept walking, but something strange happened. I heard wet paws on the pavement behind me. I glanced over my shoulder and there they were, all 5 of them, following me in a single file line. The leader, the one who'd stared me down, was out front, determined. The others followed like clumsy little soldiers. I picked up my pace, or tried to with this leg that hasn't worked right since the incident. They sped up too. I stopped in front of Big Mike's corner store to test a theory. They stopped too, sitting on the sidewalk like they were waiting for orders. "You following me?" I asked out loud, feeling stupid for talking to dogs. "Look, little guys, I'm not good company. Find someone else." But when I started walking again, there they were, glued to my shadow. The sleet was getting heavier, and they were shivering more with each step, but they didn't give up, like they'd decided I was their only shot. When I reached my building, a 3-flat I inherited from my mother in better times, all 5 positioned themselves on my front stoop. They didn't try to push past me, just sat in a semicircle and looked up at me with those brown eyes full of hope. I opened my apartment door and stood in the doorway looking down at them. The sleet had turned to snow, forming little puddles around their tiny paws. They didn't move, not even when a CTA bus rumbled past and backfired like a gunshot. "Listen up," I said, leaning on my cane. My voice came out shakier than I wanted. "Listen, little ones, I'm broken too. I can barely take care of myself since everything that happened. You deserve someone better than me." The smallest one, with the star-shaped patch, let out a soft whimper that cut through me like a blade. It was the same sound I made inside every day, a silent plea for help. I stood there for long minutes, snow melting in my graying hair, looking at 5 creatures who had decided to trust me even though I didn't deserve anyone's trust. They didn't know I spent nights in my kitchen staring at my service weapon in the drawer. They didn't know there were days I couldn't even shower. But something about their determination, the way they stayed put despite getting soaked, moved a part of me I thought had died, along with my career. "All right," I sighed, opening the door, "but just for tonight until this weather passes." They came in slowly, respectfully, like they understood they were stepping on sacred ground. In my small entryway, they huddled together in a pile of wet fur and shared warmth. I went into the apartment and headed for the kitchen. I had leftover fried chicken in the fridge, bought it thinking about dinner, but like always, I'd ended up eating nothing but Wonder Bread with butter. I warmed up the meat, tore it into small pieces, and put it in a deep bowl with some warm water. When I came back to the entryway with the food, all 5 lifted their little heads at once. The smell of the chicken made their eyes light up in a way I hadn't seen in human eyes for a long time. Pure gratitude. I set the bowl down and stepped back. They approached carefully, sniffed, and then something happened that made me swallow hard. Instead of fighting over the food like I expected, the biggest one took a piece and carried it to the smallest. Then he came back and ate with the others, organized, respectful. "You're a family," I murmured, feeling something strange in my chest, something I hadn't felt in years. "You take care of each other." And died when they finished eating. They arranged themselves in their pile again. But this time the leader came over to where I was sitting on my folding chair and rested his head against my good leg. The gesture was so simple, so pure, that my eyes burned. "Thank you," he seemed to be saying. "Thank you for not walking past." I slowly reached out and touched his wet head. He closed his eyes and sighed, a sigh of relief that echoed in my hollow chest. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel completely alone. Outside, the snow kept falling, but in my entryway 5 little hearts were beating peacefully. And maybe, just maybe, mine had started beating a little stronger too. I woke up at 3 a.m. to a strange noise in the entryway. For a moment, lying in the darkness of my bedroom, I thought it had all been a bad dream, or a good one. I couldn't tell anymore. But the noise continued, soft whimpering and the sound of paws on the cold linoleum. I got up slowly, testing the weight on my injured leg. November cold in Chicago is brutal, and even inside the apartment I could feel the icy wind seeping through the cracks around the windows. If I was cold, how must they feel? I turned on the living room light and walked to the entryway. All 5 were awake, huddled in a corner, shaking with cold. The smallest one, the one with the star-shaped patch, was coughing in a way that reminded me of my first days in the VA hospital after the incident. The cough of someone losing a battle. "Damn," I muttered. "You're gonna get sick out there." For those following this journey of transformation, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. I looked at my living room. 3 years of living alone had turned it into a storage unit for bad memories. Boxes of police department stuff stacked in the corner, furniture covered with sheets, photographs turned face down. It was like a mausoleum of the life I'd had before. But these 5 needed shelter, and I couldn't pretend I didn't care anymore. "Okay," I said, opening the glass door to the living room, "but just for tonight, and if you make a mess, you're out." They came in slowly, sniffing everything with respectful curiosity. The leader, I started calling him Sarge in my head, came straight to me and sat down next to my cane. The others spread out through the living room but didn't wander far. I went to the hall closet and pulled out some old towels my ex-wife had left behind when she moved out. Yeah, she left me too. I don't blame her. Living with a broken man can't be easy. "Come here," I called, spreading the towels on the floor. "I'll dry you off." One by one, they let me towel them dry. It was incredible how they trusted me, a complete stranger who could have done anything to them. As I dried the wet fur of the smallest, Star, I decided to call him, he looked right into my eyes and licked my hand. It was a simple moment, but it cracked something open in my chest. 3 years, and nobody had touched me with kindness, not a handshake, not a hug, nothing. And here was this little puppy offering the only thing he had, pure gratitude. When I finished drying them, they arranged themselves in a corner of the living room, close together for warmth. I sat in my recliner and watched them. It was strange to have life in the house again. Ever since Mary left, taking the laughter, conversations, and even the arguments with her, silence had become my only companion. "You know what?" I told them. "It's been a long time since I had visitors. You've got better manners than most people I've met." Sarge lifted his ears, like he was really listening. The others kept sleeping, their small, steady breathing creating a symphony of peace I didn't know I needed. I remembered the night shifts when I was on the force. How many times had I found entire families living on the streets, kids sleeping in cardboard boxes, and I always wondered how they could sleep like that, defenseless, trusting that someone wouldn't hurt them during the night. Now I understood. When you have nothing, any gesture of kindness becomes a fortress. It must have been around 4 a.m. when I heard a different sound. Star was restless, trying to get up but wobbling. I rushed over to him. Well, I limped as fast as I could and saw he had a fever. "Hey, little warrior," I whispered, touching his forehead. "It was too hot. You're not feeling good." I picked him up, surprised by how light he was. I could feel his ribs through the still damp fur. In the bathroom, I wet a small washcloth with cool water and began dabbing his forehead, like my mother used to do for me when I was a kid. "It's gonna be okay," I murmured, not really believing my own words. How could I promise that when I was broken myself? But something incredible happened. Sarge appeared in the bathroom doorway, followed by the other 3. They positioned themselves around me like they were standing guard. Like they understood that one of the pack was in danger and they all needed to protect him. "You really are a family," I said, feeling my eyes burn. "You don't leave anyone behind." I spent the entire night taking care of Star, with the other 4 keeping me silent company. When the sun started to come up, the fever had broken, and he was sleeping peacefully in my lap. That's when I realized something that scared me. For the first time in 3 years, I had spent an entire night without thinking about dying. I looked out the living room window. Outside, the south side was waking up to another day. Women hanging laundry on fire escapes, kids getting ready for school, workers hurrying to the red line. Life was continuing, like it always had, even when I thought it had stopped. "You know what?" I said to my 5 companions. "I think you came to teach me something." Sarge came over to me and rested his head on my good leg. His look said everything. "We need to learn too. We'll learn together." In that moment, sitting on the bathroom floor, with a sick puppy in my lap and 4 guardians around me, I understood that maybe I wasn't as broken as I thought. Maybe there was still something in me that was good for something. Maybe there was still something in me worth saving. The sun was high when I woke up in my recliner in the living room, with Star still warm in my lap and the other 4 scattered around me like little soldiers on watch. My neck ached from sleeping in the chair, but strangely I felt more rested than I had in months. Star opened his little eyes and looked at me in that way only dogs have, like I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. The fever was completely gone. "Good morning, little warrior," I whispered, stroking his head. "Feeling better?" He answered by licking my hand and trying to stand up. He was still weak, but already showing more energy. The others started waking up with his movement, stretching in a way that pulled the first genuine smile from me in a long time. Then reality hit me like a punch to the gut. I had 5 dogs in my apartment, 5 mouths to feed, 5 lives depending on me. And I, who could barely take care of myself, how was I supposed to manage? If this story is touching your heart like it touched mine, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more true stories. My disability pension wasn't much, $2,100 a month. After paying the basic bills, there wasn't much left for groceries. And now, dog food, medicine, maybe vaccines. The weight of responsibility fell on me like a stone. "What have I done?" I muttered, running my hand through my hair. "You guys deserve someone who can take proper care of you." But when I looked at them, all watching me with absolute trust, I couldn't imagine returning them to the streets, especially Star, who was still recovering. I decided to start with the basics. Food. I opened the refrigerator and found only eggs, half a package of Polish sausage and a wilted onion. In the pantry, rice and beans. Not exactly an ideal diet for puppies, but it would have to do. I cooked scrambled eggs with some chopped sausage, no seasoning. While I cooked, all 5 positioned themselves at the kitchen entrance, patient, just watching. They didn't run to the pan, didn't beg desperately for food. They waited. "You have better manners than most adults I've known," I commented, dividing the food into 5 improvised bowls. After their breakfast, which they devoured like it was the finest feast in the world, I realized another problem. I had to go out. Doctor, bank, grocery store. Life hadn't stopped just because I was now responsible for 5 lives. "You're staying here, okay?" I said, taking my cane and keys. "Don't make a mess. I'll be right back." Sarge came to me and sat in front of the door like he was saying, "Don't go. You just entered our lives." "I know, buddy," I murmured, petting his head, "but I need to handle some things so I can take better care of you guys." I left home with a heavy heart. It was ridiculous. 2 days ago, I didn't even know they existed, and now I couldn't imagine the empty apartment. At the Jewel Osco, I went to the pet supplies aisle. The prices shocked me. A small bag of puppy food cost almost $25. 5 puppies would finish that in a few days. I did math in my head. Just food would be over $300 a month, not counting medicine, vaccines, possible emergencies. I put the bag of puppy food in my cart anyway. Then I took 5 cans of wet food. "For puppies," it said on the package. Another $15. 2 cheap leashes, $8 each. A package of dog biscuits, $6. At checkout, I calculated the total, $62. Almost half of what I usually spent on groceries for the entire month. And this was just the beginning. Coming home with the purchases, I found a scene that broke my heart. All 5 were exactly where I had left them, sitting in a row in the living room, staring directly at the door, like they had remained there motionless, waiting for me. "Did you think I wasn't coming back?" I asked, and the relief in their eyes was the answer. I spent the rest of the day organizing a space for them. I separated old towels for beds, put water bowls throughout the apartment, tested the new food. While I worked, they accompanied me closely, like little supervisors. I was just sweeping the back porch when Mrs. Washington, my 72-year-old neighbor, appeared at the fence. "Good afternoon, Detective," she said somewhat cautiously. "I heard dog barking. You got dogs?" Mrs. Washington had always tried to talk to me in the 3 years I'd lived here, but I always responded with monosyllables and walked away. She must have thought I was crazy or rude. "Found them on the street," I replied, preparing for complaints about noise or mess. "Oh my goodness, what little sweethearts," she said, smiling at the sight of the 5 curious ones peeking through the fence. "They're skinny. How old are they?" "About 2 months, I think." "Still babies. They're gonna be work, you know. Need to eat several times a day, shots, deworming." She paused. "You know anything about dogs?" The question I'd been avoiding. "No," I admitted. "Never had one." Instead of the criticism I expected, Mrs. Washington smiled. "My son's a veterinarian. Got a clinic over on Cottage Grove. If you want, I can talk to him. Maybe he'll give you a special price." It was the first spontaneous kindness anyone had offered me in 3 years. I felt something strange in my chest, gratitude mixed with shame for being so closed off with her. "Thank you," I stammered. "But I don't know if I can afford a vet for 5. We'll talk to him. Sometimes kindness finds a way." She petted Sarge through the fence. "They chose you for a reason, Detective. Dogs have that instinct." That night, after giving them their second meal of the day and watching how they devoured everything with gratitude, I thought about Mrs. Washington's words. They chose you for a reason. Did they really choose me? Or did I finally choose something other than loneliness? Looking at the 5 sleeping peacefully in the living room, my living room that had been just a warehouse of sadness for 3 years, I realized that maybe it didn't matter who chose whom. What mattered was that for the first time in a long while, I had a reason to wake up tomorrow. 4 weeks had passed since the 5 had entered my life, and the routine in the apartment had completely changed. I woke up every day at 6 in the morning, not because the alarm clock rang, but because 5 cold noses were nudging me, looking for breakfast. "Good morning, squad," had become my habit to say, still with my eyes closed. It was incredible how this morning greeting had become the best part of my day. Star, completely recovered from the fever, was now the biggest troublemaker of the group. He had discovered he could steal socks from the laundry basket and scatter them throughout the apartment. The others, Sarge, who remained the leader, Honey, the fattest, Little Girl, the only female, and Scout, who had darker stripes in his coat, had each developed their unique personalities. This transformation story is just beginning. Subscribe to the channel to follow every chapter of this incredible journey. Dr. Williams, Mrs. Washington's son, had come the previous week for a house call. a tall man in his 40s, with the calm manner of someone who understands animals and also wounded people. "All 5 are healthy," he said after examining each one. "They just need to gain weight and get their basic shots. I'll give you a special rate, $75 per visit, vaccines included. And listen, Detective, you're doing an excellent job." $75 per visit was still expensive for my budget, but much less than the $200 he'd normally charge. The neighbor's kindness had indeed found a way. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, genuinely curious. Dr. Williams smiled, petting Sarge. "My mother told me your story. 28 years with CPD, right? You've already helped a lot of people in your life. Now it's our turn to return the favor." Those words echoed in my head for days. Had I already helped a lot of people? In the last 3 years, I could only remember the mistakes, the domestic call that went wrong and left me with PTSD, the depression that drove my wife away. But maybe there were other memories buried under all that pain. The most surprising change, however, was happening in myself. Getting up early to feed the 5 forced me into a routine. Taking them to the backyard for their business got me out of bed. Playing with them in the afternoons. Yes, I had started playing, pulled me from the recliner where I used to sit brooding over sorrows. It was one of those afternoons when I met Mr. Johnson, the neighbor on the other side. A black man about 60, retired from the steel mill, who appeared at the fence while I was trying to teach the 5 not to completely destroy the backyard. "Good afternoon, neighbor," he said, resting his arms on the fence. "Quite a crew you got there." "Good afternoon," I replied, still a bit wary. 3 years of antisocial behavior don't change overnight. "You know, I used to have 5 dogs too," Mr. Johnson continued, "when my wife was still alive. She loved strays. Always said they had more gratitude than any purebred." Something in his way of speaking made me stop what I was doing. There was a familiar sadness in his eyes, the same emptiness I recognized in the mirror. "Has she been gone long?" I asked without thinking. 4 years next month. Diabetes." He paused, watching little girl chase a leaf. "After she passed, I couldn't have animals anymore. Hurts too much when you lose them." I understood perfectly what he meant. That's why I had avoided getting attached to anything in recent years. Loss hurts, and I had already lost too much. "But seeing you out there," Mr. Johnson continued, "I think she was right. They save us as much as we save them." In the following days, Mr. Johnson started appearing regularly. He brought food scraps for the 5, advice on how to better care for them, and most importantly, conversations. Real conversations, not the superficial talk I so feared. "You know what happened to me?" I asked one afternoon, while we watched the 5 playing tug-of-war with a stick. "Mrs. Washington mentioned something. Cop who took a bullet?" "It wasn't just the bullet," I confessed. "It was everything that came after. Forced retirement, depression. My wife left me. One day I woke up and didn't recognize my own life." Mr. Johnson nodded slowly. "I know that feeling. When you build your whole life around something, work, marriage, health, and that something collapses, it feels like you collapse with it." "Exactly. And the worst part is, everyone expects you to bounce back quick, to be strong, to move on. Like it's that simple." "It's not simple," Mr. Johnson agreed, "but it's not impossible either. Look what you've accomplished in 4 weeks. I looked around. The yard that had been neglected now had improvised toys scattered about. The apartment that had lived in deathly silence now echoed with happy barking and pattering paws. And I, who had spent days without talking to anyone, now talked with neighbors, the vet, even the employees at the pet store. "You know what impresses me most," Mr. Johnson said. "It's how you've changed physically. A month ago, you barely looked up when you walked down the street. Today you're out here, laughing, playing with them." He was right. I hadn't noticed, but I had started shaving regularly again, changing clothes daily, leaving the house without it being strictly necessary. Small things that seemed insignificant, but were actually signs that I had begun caring about myself again. Don't miss the next chapter of this incredible transformation. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. One afternoon, while giving Scout a bath, he had fallen in a mud puddle. I realized I was humming. When was the last time I had done that? Mary always said I hummed when I was truly happy. You like music? I asked Scout, who was wagging his tail despite being wet and soapy. Your adoptive mum loved it when I sang. It was the first time I could talk about Mary without feeling that stab of anger and abandonment in my chest. Maybe because I now better understood why she had left. Living with someone in deep depression is exhausting, even when you love that person. That night, after the five had settled down to sleep, now they slept scattered throughout the living room, each with their own blanket. I caught myself doing something I hadn't done in years, planning for the future. Tomorrow, I would take Honey and Little Girl for their second vaccination. Next week, I would start an online basic training course that Dr. Williams had recommended. And maybe it was time to call some former colleagues from CPD who always invited me to barbecues. I picked up the phone and looked at the contacts. Sergeant Murphy, Detective Rodriguez, Officer Martinez. Good people who had tried to help me after the incident, but whom I had pushed away in my bitterness. What do you think? I asked the five. Think they still want to know me? Sarge lifted his head from the blanket and looked at me with that wise way only he had, like he was saying, there's only one way to find out. I took a deep breath and texted Sergeant Murphy. Hey Murphy, it's John. Sorry I disappeared. Is that Sunday barbecue still happening? The response came in less than 5 minutes. John! Buddy, what a relief. Of course it's still happening. This Sunday at my place, 3 p.m. You can bring someone. I smiled, looking at my 5 someones scattered around the living room. I think we'll have to negotiate that part, I murmured. But for the first time in a long while, I really wanted to go. I wanted to talk to people, tell them about my new life, maybe even laugh at some old war stories from the force. The 5 had given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. The desire to live in community, to be part of the world again. And the most incredible thing was, they had done it simply by being themselves. Creatures who loved unconditionally, lived in the present, turned any house into a home. The Sunday barbecue at Sergeant Murphy's came faster than I expected. I woke up nervous for the first time in years, not the bad nervous of anxiety, but that flutter in your stomach when you're about to do something different and possibly good. What now, squad? I asked the 5 while picking out a shirt from my closet. 3 years I haven't been to a party. Do I still remember how to do this? Little Girl came over to me and stood on her hind legs, putting her front paws on my leg. It was her way of saying, "You got this, Dad." Yeah, Dad. I had started thinking of myself that way, and they seemed to understand the role perfectly. They were my 4-legged kids, and I was the father I never thought I'd be. I arrived at Murphy's place in Bridgeport right at 3. It was a simple 2-flat with a grill on the back deck and that unmistakable smell of Italian beef on charcoal. When I rang the bell, I heard familiar voices inside and for a second wanted to run back home. John, no freaking way! Sergeant Murphy opened the door with a huge smile. Look who decided to show up among the living. The embraces I got there were like water for a man dying of thirst. Detective Rodriguez, Officer Martinez, Captain O'Brien, people who had shared squad cars, tough nights, and risks with me for years, people I had pushed away in my pain. Man, you look different, said Rodriguez, watching me as I put beers in the cooler. Somehow, I don't know, more relaxed. If this journey of rebuilding moves you, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I got 5 dogs, I replied, and immediately felt stupid. How do you explain that 5 strays saved you when beloved people couldn't? 5? Martinez almost choked on his beer. John, you who didn't even have houseplants. I didn't have people either, I laughed, but sometimes life forces you to change. I spent the entire afternoon talking about the 5, showing photos on my phone, discussing challenges and joys. It was amazing how much I had to tell about 4 weeks of living with them. You got to bring them over sometime, Murphy said. My wife loves dogs, and the kids do too. They're kind of troublemakers, I warned. Star discovered he can steal slippers and hide them under the bed. Honey thinks any noise on the street is an invasion and barks to alert. Scout, I stopped mid-sentence, realizing something incredible. I was speaking with enthusiasm, laughing, gesticulating. When was the last time I had done that? Man, said O'Brien slowly, you're in love with those animals. I was. Completely, irrevocably in love with 5 golden furballs who had invaded my life without asking permission. On the ride back on the crowded Sunday Red Line, I thought about the afternoon I had lived. I talked about work, old jokes, future plans. Rodriguez invited me to a softball game between ex-cops. Martinez suggested I take a security course for extra income. Life. I was starting to have a life again. When I opened the apartment door, I was greeted by 5 small hurricanes of joy, like they had been counting the minutes until my return. Sarge did that joy spin that only dogs can do. Little girl brought a toy in her mouth, like a gift. Star, Honey, and Scout took turns celebrating on my legs. Did you miss Dad? I asked, kneeling to receive all that load of love. I missed you too. It was true. Throughout the entire barbecue, no matter how much fun I was having, part of me was eager to get home, to them. For the first time in years, home meant home again. That night, preparing dinner for the 5, they now had precise schedules and balanced menus. I realized my routine had completely transformed. I woke up at 6, gave them breakfast, drank my own coffee while they played on the back porch. At 9, walked through the neighborhood. They forced me to go out, and I discovered I liked watching the street activity, greeting neighbors, feeling the sun on my skin. Noon, lunch and collective nap in the living room. 2 o'clock, playtime on the porch. 4 o'clock, second walk. 6 o'clock, their dinner and mine. 8 o'clock, all gathered in the living room to watch television. Actually, for me to pet each one individually while thinking about the day. 10 o'clock, bedtime. Each in their corner, but always close, always forming a family. It was a simple, predictable routine, and for the first time in my life, I felt no boredom or claustrophobia with it. It was comforting to know that someone depended on me, that my existence made a difference in the world, even if only for 5 puppies. You know what I discovered today? I told them while brushing my teeth. You guys gave me a job. Sarge tilted his head, curious. The job of being a dad, a caretaker, a family. I spit out the toothpaste and looked at myself in the mirror. The man looking back at me still had grey hair, still limped, still carried scars, but his eyes were bright. There was life in them again. And you know what the best part of this job is, I continued. You don't care that I'm broken. You love me just the way I am. That's when I understood something fundamental. I didn't need to be completely healed to be useful, to be loved, to have a life worth living. The 5 had taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's about presence, care, consistency. They never knew I was an ex-cop, that I had a pension, that I was once married, or that I'd taken a bullet. For them, I had always been simply John, the man who gave them shelter on a cold November night and decided to stay. And maybe that was the only identity that really mattered. In bed, listening to the small sounds of the apartment now full of life again, peaceful breathing, little sleep sighs, the occasional rustle of someone finding a more comfortable position, I smiled in the darkness. For the first time in 3 years, I couldn't wait to wake up tomorrow. 11 months have passed since that rainy November night, and as I write these words, Star is sleeping in my lap, little girl has stolen my left slipper again, and the other 3 are scattered around the living room like little guardians of our peace. The word came naturally, without thinking. Our family, our home, our routine, our joy. This morning, something happened that made me decide to tell this story. I was trimming flowers on the back porch. Yes, now I have flowers too. The 5 inspired me to nurture living things. When the doorbell rang, it was Mary, my ex-wife, stood at the door, thinner than before, with some new grey streaks, but still beautiful. We looked at each other for a long time, and I felt nothing. No anger, no nostalgia, no bitterness, just a strange peace. This story is coming to an end, but your journey of transformation might just be beginning. Subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. "Hi, John," she said quietly. "Can I come in?" "Sure." I opened the door, and immediately the five came to investigate the visitor. Mary smiled, a genuine smile I hadn't seen in years. "Oh, how sweet. Are they yours?" "They're family," I replied. "Coffee?" We sat in the kitchen, which now had colourful water bowls scattered across the floor and a collage of photos of the five on the refrigerator. Mary looked around in amazement. "You changed the whole apartment," she said. "They changed the apartment," I corrected. "I just let it happen." "John, she began, but I gently interrupted her. "You don't need to explain anything, Mary, really." "I do. I left you when you needed me most. I couldn't handle your depression, your anger, what you'd become." Little girl chose that moment to enter the kitchen dragging my slipper, which was 3 times bigger than her. The moment became so absurd that Mary laughed, spontaneously, breaking any tension that might have remained. "And now?" she asked. "How did you do it?" I looked at little girl wrestling with the slipper and felt that warmth in my chest that had become familiar. "I learned that sometimes you don't heal alone. Sometimes you have to take care of someone to remember you can still love." Mary was quiet for a moment, watching Star cautiously approach and lean his head against my hand. "They saved you, didn't they?" "We saved each other." We talked for another hour. Mary told me she was going to therapy, that she'd started working at a non-profit, that she was learning to live alone too. There were no requests for reconciliation or recriminations. Just 2 people who had once loved each other, acknowledging they had taken different paths, and that was okay. When she left, the 5 positioned themselves around me at the door, like they always did when they sensed I needed support. "Don't worry," I said, petting each one. "That's the past. You're the present and future." This transformation was only possible because someone never stopped loving. If this story touched you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. That afternoon, Dr. Williams came for the 5's monthly checkup. Now he was more friend than vet, always staying for coffee and conversation after the examinations. "John, can I ask you a personal question?" he said while Scout tried to chew the stethoscope. "Sure." "What changed? And don't tell me it was just the dogs. There's something more." I thought about the question while watching my 5 4-legged sons scattered around the porch, each in their favorite spot, safe, loved, at home. "I think it was responsibility," I answered finally. When you're taking care of someone who depends completely on you, you don't have time to feel sorry for yourself. You have to get up, you have to function, you have to be strong, not for yourself, but for someone who needs you. And in the process, you discover you can still be strong. Exactly. And more than that, you discover that being needed is one of the best feelings in the world. That night, after Dr. Williams left, and the 5 ate their premium kibble, now I could afford the good stuff, I sat thinking about everything that had changed. It wasn't just the house full of life, or the organized routine, or the new friends I'd found through them. It was something deeper. I believed again that I deserved to be loved. For 3 years I lived convinced I was a broken man, useless, good for nothing anymore. The 5 taught me that being wounded doesn't mean being dead, that everyone deserves a second chance, even yourself. They taught me that family isn't about blood or marriage. It's about the daily decision to care, to protect, to love. It's about being present in the hard times and celebrating the good ones together. Don't miss other true stories of transformation. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for notifications. Today, when I wake up in the morning and see 5 pairs of eyes looking at me with unconditional love, I remember something my mother always said. God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Maybe my path was more twisted than most. The bullet, the disability, the depression, the divorce, everything seemed to conspire against me. But it was precisely because I was broken that I could recognize other broken hearts on a rainy street. It was precisely because I knew what it was like to be abandoned that I couldn't abandon 5 puppies shivering in the cold. It was precisely because I needed saving that I could save. Now, at 11 at night, as I write these final words, Sarge lies at my feet, little girl snores softly on the couch, Star makes those sounds of a dreaming dog, Honey has changed position for the 5th time, and Scout stands guard at the window. My apartment is no longer silent. It's full of life, love, purpose. My life is no longer empty. It's full of meaning, even on the hard days, because hard days still exist. The difference is, I don't face them alone anymore. If you're going through a dark time, if you feel like you've lost your way, if you think you're good for nothing, I want you to know something. Sometimes salvation comes from where you least expect it. Sometimes it comes in the form of 5 hungry strays who decide to trust you when you don't even trust yourself. Sometimes you save someone by saving yourself. Sometimes love is just that, 2 broken creatures deciding to fix each other. And sometimes, just sometimes becomes forever. Thank you for following my story. If it touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to know there's always hope.